racism and anti-racism. Is racism black and white? We have all no doubt been reflecting on the recent letter by Diane Abbott and what she articulated or tried to articulate in her letter, and the public debate and discussion that has come about as a result of that. And we thought it was important as the Institute for Education and Social Equity to engage with these matters of importance, social equity, pertaining to two really important issues, racism and anti-Semitism. So we are delighted, colleagues, that you are able to join us this afternoon. And we are really, really delighted as well to have our panelists join us as well. Penny Ravager, who is an education consultant and doctoral researcher, and Dr. Anna Carlisle, an academic and researcher, and also Dr. Christine Calenda, an academic and researcher. And these colleagues are well placed to help us to understand these important issues that we have to grapple with in this session this afternoon. I will ask colleagues, if you are so kind enough, to put your mics on mute, and there will be lots of opportunities for you to ask questions, and we hope that colleagues will feel confident to come on mic at such times and do that. We also ask, where possible, to keep the noise in the chat to a minimum, so that there is a kind of a focus and a presence in our conversation. We are really hoping to leave here being much clearer about racism, anti-Semitism, how these are similar, how these are different, how these manifest, and so on. So this could be a beneficial exercise for all of us. So, colleagues, I'm going to invite my colleagues then to respond to the question of what is racism. So, Anna, Penny, in your mind, what is racism? Christine? Penny, you want to come in?
I'll hold back. I'm promising myself to not speak first on anything.
Christine, did you want to take that one? What is racism?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer in a couple of sentences, because it really often depends on one's knowledge, one's experience as well. So coming from a purely personal perspective, I would say it's discrimination and prejudice against a person based on some particular characteristic they may have, be that race, nationality, religion, that's based and that is based on assumptions and bias and stereotypes.
Thank you. But before I bring you in, Anna, I wonder then, might it be worth looking at Lord Macpherson's definition of racism, because that's the sort of most widely used definition of racism in the UK, and maybe that would be instructive for us. Lord Macpherson used the definition for racism that, you know, it's prejudice or discrimination based on color, based on culture, or based on ethnic origin. So there are three key points in this definition. It's based on skin color, so ethnicity or race, if we use that term. It's culture, which could include religion, language, and other artifacts of culture. But it could also be in terms of ethnic origin, so nationality, so where you're born or where you come from, and therefore the structural barriers such as visas or English language tests or other things which people are asked to do. So I wonder then if thinking about this definition in the context of what Christine has said, Anna and Penny, this might be more beneficial. Anna, I come to you.
Yeah, so I think it's useful to lay the responsibility for justifying this stance on the perpetrator. So rather than trying to define people who experience racism, where we tie ourselves up in knots about what nationality means and things like that, we could describe this belief system of one which perpetuates prejudice and discrimination on the basis of negative assumptions about, and this is the key word, perceptions of skin color, culture, and nationality, and things like that. And it's the perceptions side of things which situates the prejudice in the brain of the person perpetrating the racism. And it's the perception side of things which makes the visual racism experienced by people in relation to skin color specifically immediate. I think that helps us to understand that distinction. But for me, it's not just about active racism, it's also about inaction. So if you're in a position of power in an institution and you're not actively undoing the systems that perpetuate institutional racism, or more broadly, if you're white and you're not actively anti-racist, then you are perpetuating a racist system.
Thanks, Anna. You've raised two important points there, Penny. One of them being perception, I think, therefore I am, and also that notion of complicity. Pass to you, Penny.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just relate to the definitions of race as well, because I think race is the child of racism and not the other way around. So the project of creating races in order to create racial hierarchies which kind of position white people and white interests at the top of this perceived hierarchy is really important. So there's, you know, that's how we can move away from racism being only interpersonal and only about enacting prejudice in kind of, you know, spoken ways, and to think about this. Macpherson also talks about institutional racism, about this collective failure, and it builds on the construction of race as this hierarchy, and racism is that, you know, is the kind of felt expression of that can be felt not only through verbal means, but also through those blockers, through discrimination, through unwitting prejudice, as it was called when Macpherson was writing that report and thinking about these things. And the other thing just to note is that racism is kind of always available as a way to structure society, and race and racism gets reversioned and repackaged and described to move with the times. So even if we successfully define it now, it shifts and morphs and moves as we do as a society.
I think that's really helpful, and in fact in Macpherson's definition, he talks about that it becomes more sophisticated and it changes its form. And what you've really said, colleagues, is extremely helpful, because you know, it is accepted that there are 4 levels of racism. You have personal racism, So these beliefs, these assumptions, these views that we hold, as Anna said, that there is that white people are more superior. So that's more the perceptual element. And then you have the interpersonal racism, which is what is shared between individuals. So neighbors at the fence, within a family home, friendship groups, classroom, boardroom, staff room, and so on. And then you have the institutional racism, which you touched on there, Penny, within the policy apparatus of our institutions. And then you have the structural racism, which is what Christine talked about, the sort of legislative apparatus of the government, of the state, the machinery, and so on. So I think it's really helpful, colleagues. Thank you to help us to understand that yes, there is an individual element, a perceptual element. I think, therefore I am, and therefore I become complicit. But also to remove that burden from the individual and think about the institutional element of racism and also the structural element. Colleagues, we'll come back to this, no doubt, and I'm sure members of the audience will no doubt have questions. But let's look at anti-Semitism then, and what that means in terms of a definition, or how it manifests itself. I mean, a lot of people might find the definition from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance quite problematic. Some people might find it quite comprehensive, but according to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, they suggest that anti-racism is and anti-Semitism rather is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. We all know, of course, that this definition has been criticized widely, but it's a starting point and a well-used definition. And I'm going to invite Penny and Anna to reflect on this. And what do you think? What in your mind, and certainly as Jews, what is anti-Semitism?
Well, on the face of it, anti-Semitism is prejudice towards a person or a group of people because of, and I'm going to use that word, perceptions again, of the characteristic of Jewishness. The definition, the IHRA definition, without the exemplifications provided, is less complex. But when the International Holocaust Remembrance definition is presented to institutions to adopt, and let's not forget the government put enormous pressure on higher education institutions, universities, to adopt it on pain of fine if they didn't. It arrived not just as this definition, but with a series of, I think it's 7 or 8 examples, exemplifications. And those are very illuminating, actually. So it's what's meant by Jewish community institutions and this word property, which is the issue, because the examples given with the definition, and this is why some universities chose to adopt the definition without the examples, explicitly excluding the examples, tend mostly to refer to the state of Israel. So what the definition does is it conflates Jewishness with the Israeli state or the Israeli government even. And I suppose a parallel might be to think of any nationality, any country, and to think about how it would be to be described as prejudice towards a member of that country on the basis of a criticism of that government's actions. So take a moment to think of any country whose government's actions you don't agree with. Think about why you disagree with it, and then think about what that means for someone who happens to have been born and raised in that country. That kind of illuminates the problem with these IRHA definitions. And those words, community, institutions, and property, which sound so kind of unproblematic, when you see the exemplifications, what they kind of dog whistle point towards, from my point of view anyway, is Israeli state actions. And there's a conflation there.
And yeah, I want to add to that as well for the avoidance of doubt, because, you know, as I go about my life, I hear some really interesting misunderstandings about what Jewish people are and where they come from. And so Israel is a very small population of the total population of Jewish people. So Jewish people don't come from, they're not Israelis necessarily. There are more Jewish people in Brooklyn than there are in the state of Israel. So that's just kind of framing why there isn't an interchangeability between being Jewish and Israeli, or believing in the, you know, settler colonial apartheid state built on Zionist sentiment that the state of Israel is now. So I think there's a lot of conflation and confusion, and that's why it's right and proper to define anti-Semitism, but to stop when it comes to political affiliations. And that to me is really, really important. And I hope we'll have a chance also to kind of unpack a little bit, again, as we talked about racism, that we talk about race. I think if we talk about anti-Semitism, to unpack a little bit what is being Jewish and whether Jews are a race, a culture, an ethnic group, and probably create more questions than answers in so doing.
Well, thank you, Penny. Thank you, Anna. Christine, did you want to respond to that question?
I don't think I'm suitably qualified to, actually. So I hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you. Let's go there then. I mean, Penny. I mean, Anna's talked about the perception of Jewishness, and in my notes here, I said, well, what counts as Jewishness, and what's the perception of Jewishness? So is being a Jew or a race, a culture, an ethnicity, or none of these? What is being Jew?
So I looked up some definitions, and it's really interesting. So Wikipedia says that a Jew is a person who is of Jewish heritage or who has converted to the Jewish religion. So a lot of Jewish people would like scream in horror at the idea that somebody who's converted is seen as Jewish, and others would say, yes, of course, it's very hard to convert. It's also defined as somebody who practices the religion of Judaism. I don't practice the religion of Judaism, but I strongly identify as Jewish. And it's also defined as somebody who's of Jewish ethnic heritage. So none of which are very helpful, right? The Oxford Dictionary says it's a member of the people and the cultural community whose traditional religion is Judaism and who trace their origins to the ancient Hebrew people of Israel. And if you look at Judaism 101, it's basically a Jew is somebody whose biological mother was a Jew. So it's matrilineal. Which a lot of people whose fathers are Jewish would be really annoyed about that. But so I don't know if there is one definition. But, is it a nationality? Is it a citizenship? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a sense of belonging to a group? That's, like I say, I think I bring more questions than I bring answers.
Let's see if Anna can help us to answer some of those questions. Anna, what do you think? Is being a Jew a race, a culture, an ethnicity, a sense of belonging? What is it?
Oh, well, I'm one of those people with a Jewish father, and I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandparents were refugees from Poland during the Second World War because they were targeted by Nazi and Russian soldiers, and some of my family were murdered as part of that experience. So can I claim Jewishness? I certainly grew up eating food that you could describe as Jewish. And when my dad goes to the Middle East for any kind of work experience, and he's in one of those line-up photos of all the people in a delegation, he doesn't look out of place. So there's looks there as well. My younger sister has very dark hair, very olive skin, very dark eyes, and Jewish features. I often get asked if I'm Turkish when I go into a kebab shop. So there's something visual going on there. But I think, and I want to talk later when we think about what anti-Semitism and racism have in common. What you can't deny is the histories that people have in their families. So it's this intergenerational trauma thing, which is based in experiences because of a perception of what your family is. So if that is a shared experience that Jewish people have had, then I would identify myself as Jewish.
And I want to just jump in there as well, because I think one of the things that's really important to point out is the Jewish experience of persecution didn't start with the Holocaust or Europe. So it's very imprinted in all of our kind of the festivals and the moments that we mark is around, there's that joke, I think somebody, even Boris Johnson might have even said the joke that, they tried to kill us, we outwitted them and survived, now let's eat. And that's basically the moments that we mark. So it's very imbued in Jewish identity, the notion of persecution, enslavement, emancipation. Passover is about telling the story, the oral history, passing it on, of emancipation from being enslaved and leaving Egypt. So while one of the things that's problematic often is this centering Jewish people as European descendant, white, and it all being around the Holocaust. And there are 30 to 40% of Jews worldwide are not Ashkenazi, so not European origin Jews. My partner's family are Iraqi Jews. There are Jews that are Iranian, Indian, Chinese, Moroccan, Yemenite, Tunisian, Ethiopian, Jamaican, and they're communities that date back to 2000 years. And that's why this whole dialogue is really interesting, because it's missing a huge chunk of people, and the interplay with racism then becomes further accentuated.
So when it was said that Diane Abbott was anti-Semitic, or the words she used were anti-Semitic, Christine, Penny, Anna, is that a fair characterization? Is it as easy as that? Christine?
I wonder if it'd be helpful just to kind of refresh ourselves on what those words were actually. I've got it in front of me, and he says, Tomiwa Owoladi claims that Irish, Jewish and traveller people all suffer from racism. They undoubtedly experience prejudice. This is similar to racism, and the two words are often used as if they are interchangeable. It is true that many types of white people with points of difference, such as redheads, can experience this prejudice, but they are not all their lives subject to racism. In pre-civil rights America, Irish people, Jewish people, and travellers were not required to sit at the back of the bus. In apartheid South Africa, these groups were allowed to vote. And at the height of slavery, there were no white-seeming people manacled on the slave ships. when I read this, when I first saw it the day it came out, I thought, I understood what Diane was trying to say, I think. I mean, obviously only Diane knows that herself, but I thought it was rather clumsily presented. And I think that's one of the reasons, and her political positioning are the reasons why people have rounded on her to claim that she was anti-Semitic. I don't believe she was comparing Jewish experience and the Holocaust to being redhead at all, but I just think it was very clumsily articulated.
Penny, what do you think?
Well, I think, yeah, part of the problematic element is that she's thinking about Ashkenazi Jews who are kind of have a proximity to whiteness. But I do think, I think there are certain things that are kind of, well, I do think the way that she articulated all of it is incredibly clumsy, is generous. And she said, you know, this was the wrong version of the letter. She's, you know, she's apologized. She's not standing by any of this. So reading it out again is kind of a bit excruciating also on her behalf. But I think some of what she says is kind of true and not true at the same time, or that Jews don't suffer the same racism as Black people and other people of color do, is kind of true and untrue at the same time. So I kind of had to think about in what ways do I mean that. So one, you know, I can choose to reveal that I'm Jewish unless I'm Orthodox, practicing Jewish and have those kind of outward trappings. And I'm not talking about, because I don't really believe that there are unifying physical characteristics of being Jewish. But, you know, if I have the trappings, I'm a man and I have a head covering and I might have the payos, the side locks, and I might have specific clothing. If you're Black, you can't really choose to reveal that when it feels safe and appropriate to do so. So that's something that might separate. I think something that we have in common is this systematic persecution and the Holocaust and colonialism and enslavement. So, you know, Jews have this 2,000-year history of persecution, enslavement, and the Holocaust, and it's marked in the kind of collective, you know, in collective historical memory. Afro-Caribbean heritage people have a very recent Holocaust in which, you know, everyone who could participate in it for their own financial benefit probably did, including some Jewish people, right? But that's not treated with the same reverence, memorial, reparations as the Holocaust is. You know, Germany has an education program for its youth about its dark past, and it has reparative funding streams to Jewish communities to this day. We don't allow that in our education programs. There's no reparative funding to subsequent generations of those impacted by enslavement. So I think that those are some of the things that I feel that perhaps she was, if she had more space to explore, she might have, you know, she might have looked at that. And I think also the way that anti-Black racism manifests itself differently is the systemic way that racism expresses itself against Black people. You know, there's outcomes that are clearly affected, which we see in education, in healthcare, the judicial system, policing, exclusion rates for Black boys, stop and search, outcomes for Black women in relation to maternity and childbirth, jail sentences and penalties for Black people versus white people. You know, so I think the way that it expresses itself, there are some marked differences, and we don't want to make a hierarchy, but that it's, if we lean into it and we try to think about it more deeply, there are differences.
Anna, thank you. Penny.
I think it's difficult to think about the distinctions here in relation to Diane Abbott, because she is a symbol of a lot of things, and she has been terribly demonized for a very long time. And that, what that does is it it creates a filter through which people hear everything she says, which isn't necessarily the same filter that people might hear other people speaking. As I said earlier, when I was talking about perception, I think what she was trying to say, although albeit clumsily, is that there's a difference where people make race-based assumptions based on visual difference, which has this kind of immediacy. But I think that what anti-Semitism and racism have in common, which I might say this to kind of push back slightly on what Diane Abbott was saying, was that people of Jewish and African or Caribbean or Indian or many other heritages have in common is intergenerational trauma based in histories of colonialism, genocide, slavery, and oppression, and also a need to assimilate in the dominant culture for safety's sake. And what that can do to people is it can result in horizontal violence. You might call Zionism an example of that, or it can also be leveraged in a different way. It can be felt and expressed as solidarity and compassion and a shared experience. And I'll never forget, in April 1999, we had those 3 London bombings. I don't know if you remember, I can't remember the name of the guy. Was it David Copeland? He was he was a racist and a Nazi, and he bombed Electric Avenue, so he was targeting black people in Brixton. Then he went to Brick Lane a few days later and targeted Asian people, and then he went to the Admiral Duncan pub a few days after that in Soho and targeted gay people. And I remember standing in a garage, I was buying petrol, and I was standing behind a black guy, and he was talking about the bombings, and I said to him, it's amazing how when things like this happen, we realize what we have in common, right? And we had this great conversation about it. So I think there's an element of, what was inherent in what Diane Abbott said, that we need to think about how we collaborate and advocate for each other and leverage our experiences and our histories to support each other and to have compassion and empathy for each other. We don't leave, no one gets left behind, is what I'm saying. So if like me, I'm a queer person, a Jewish person with people in my family who have autism, people in my family who are black, if I'm going to be actively anti-racist, I'm not going to leave anybody behind. I'm going to use that understanding of people's experience of prejudice to inform how my compassion for other people who may have experienced prejudice. So I don't think it's helpful to draw such a distinction, but it is helpful to recognize difference in experience.
Thank you, Anna, and which you've set us up nicely for the question about what's different then. So we understand, and you've clearly articulated it, what's similar intergenerational trauma and sometimes even the need to assimilate into the dominant culture. But what's different between them? Christine, Penny, can I take you there? What's different between them?
I'm coming, if it was Penny or Anna who touched on it. Something very specific around anti-Black racism, which shows up in every aspect that you can possibly think of, and where those outcomes are not good in any space. They are systematically bad in education, criminal justice system, housing, employment, health. We can roll off along this. So I think there's something very specific about anti-Black racism. And I'm getting a sense that at this moment in time, there isn't very much of an appetite to have that conversation anyway. Because I think the minute you kind of reveal that there is this systematic, continuing impact on certain groups within society, it kind of reveals really what's going on in other places as well. So for me, the anti-blackness is for me a concern anyway. I'm from that community. I'm impacted to a degree, and it does mean that we are constantly facing a battle, if not a struggle.
Thank you, Christine. Penny.
Yeah, I think so. I think I mentioned some of the things that are different, but I think also it's okay to say that there's difference without saying it's a hierarchy. And I think it's okay to say that, you know, there's some myths, some, you know, anti-Semitic or racist myths around Jews, which have been associated with whiteness and proximity to power in ways which Black people have not. And so in a way, we can be beneficiaries of some of those myths. So even though it's like a problematic trope that, you know, Jews have this, they have this kind of perceived mythical superpower of being, that's perpetuated by the media, yeah, of being kind of taking over the world, or it plays out all the same. And I think there is a real difference there. That said, I just reiterate that, you know, there's a specific population of Jews that are seen as the Jews who are perceptively white, and the same as, you know, the same as people who are Muslim and Black might face double discrimination from Muslim communities who, you know, who perceive themselves in a particular way as not Black, and they will receive, you know, racism from non-Muslim communities for being Muslim. I think there's that also that element that we don't explore enough.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to invite colleagues on the call to come on mic and engage our panel if you feel confident to do so. But this is your opportunity now to raise any questions or share any reflections that could benefit our conversation. We want this to be a two-way seminar, but also something really instructive and beneficial that could help us, all of us on the call, understand the complexities, the nuances, the challenges in the spaces that we're working within, and how we can better move forward within those spaces. So this is my invitation now to you, colleagues, to come on mic if you feel sufficiently confident to talk, share your experiences or talk with our speakers.
Thank you, speakers. That was really helpful in kind of what I was thinking as well. If I go to Diane Abbott, who, you know, I absolutely respect and adore, and have been watching, you know, and hearing about the onslaught that this lady has had to face. But I also think when you're in a position of power like that, you do have to be careful what you put out into the public, because they're always waiting. As a Black person, they're always waiting for you to get it wrong so they can say, oh, you see, there was always this agenda, this anti-everybody agenda other than for Black people. So there's where my, you know, I was really upset. My heart sank when I saw that letter. And then saying it was a first draft just added salt to the wound. And I think there is something about we are different, but it's that collective collaboration against those and who kind of keep us in the status quo of structural racism and institutional racism, that we have to gather together to disrupt and not to fall out with each other. We're human beings and we're communities and we'll disagree. And there are things that we'll never come together about because we are different, but we need to have the togetherness. I think that's the strength. That's the important thing that we need to do. Yeah, I hope I've been able to express myself, because I'm still sad about Diana, but
Thank you, Mushrat. Bill.
Thank you, Paul. I was going to say exactly what Musharat just said. Firstly, Diane Abbott, you know, she's such an advocate for anti-racism. She's always the lead speaker for Stand Up to Racism, and she's really passionate. So when she made this mistake, which I think that's exactly what it is, it was a mistake. However, it's questioned my feelings towards her now, which I really hate as well, to be honest, because she was always someone who I thought was a role model, you know, being the first Black female MP. She's achieved so much, but then to do what she did, my heart sank, and I still don't know what I feel about her. And you know, and I need, I need some time to think about that. But I think what it's highlighted, and hearing the speakers today, Anna and Penny, talking about the togetherness, working together, we are stronger when we work together to fight against racism. And I think focusing on these problematic things that Diane Abbott does, it removes us away, it diverts our focus, takes us away from the real problems, which is this government. It's the Conservative Party and all the right-wing media sources out there. But I think what I'm trying to say is, I think we're all at different levels of our understanding, and it's actually events like this which are so important. And I would love it if the whole world could actually join and listen to speakers and get involved with a conversation, because that's how we learn, by having conversations and being open to hearing different perspectives. You know, I'm you can't see, but I'm a South Asian man of heritage, but I was born in England. But you know, I've experienced so much in my whole life, but I still want a better tomorrow for my children and my children's children, you know. And I'm really sad to say this without being negative, but I don't think it's going to be resolved in my lifetime. And that sort of makes me quite sad, but it won't stop me fighting for an anti-racist society. But yeah, it's, you know, the only way I'll do that is by attending these sessions, learning about all the different nuances, learning about people's different experiences. Yeah, so I'm waffling now, so I'm going to shut up and let other people talk. But yeah, thank you so much, speakers. Amazing, really, really important.
Thank you, Bill. Whilst I wait for other colleagues to make up their minds, you know, Bill, your last point there has just reminded us of something we all have said in our own work, that there is no hierarchy of inequity. And so what your views there is just so helpful a reminder that, you know, there are differences in terms of structural inequalities out there, but we have to be careful to not run the risk of claiming that they are hierarchies, you know, because we can lose so much support and for the work we're trying to do. Any other reflections from yes, go on.
I would like to ask the panel, thank you very much. I found it very interesting, and also I feel more sympathetic to Diana as a result of what you've all been saying, but I still do not, what do the panel think her motives were in this clumsy, borderline malicious in some ways, because she has been the subject of some controversy. She's mentioned in David Baddiel's book with her Twitter comments on Lucille Berger. So she can't have been naive to some of the consequences of wading into this debate. And I just do not understand what her motives were in this clumsy way she portrayed herself. I know we can't speak for her, but I am confused why she did it, and in the way she did it.
Sorry, can I just say, this is interesting. I mean, it's crass, but I'm not, I'm not academically inclined, but I'm interested in the feelings of sorrow and, but we preface this with a lifetime of service, public service, and everybody in Parliament knowing that Diane Abbott receives more racism than any MP combined. And I think that it's interesting how you can have a lifetime of service and make one mistake, and it's all of the previous, you come under horrendous judgment. And I'm not here to speak for Diane, but I can own, and I'm not here to speak for it because I don't know her, but I can only imagine that a feeling of tiredness, then your filter goes, and then you just say something. And, all those years of being politically correct and saying the right thing and not rocking the boat, not putting your head above the parapet. I mean, I have no idea what it must have been like to, in the beginning, be in Parliament and continue on with that momentum of racial abuse. I have no idea, because I've never experienced in isolation that type of behavior on a constant 24-hour basis in a place what's predominantly male and you're female. So you're already in a minority anyway. She goes back that far. So I think that, yes, the words are the words, and we have agreed that they're not agreeable. But I think because I've sat and I've listened in media about Boris Johnson and the tirade of things he was able to say about several different communities, but he didn't receive half the backlash. And he wrote articles about different races and cultures, and publication after publication. She wrote one, I don't even know if it's 100 words, 50 words, and look at the and to me that also speaks of the racism that happens if a Black person dares make a mistake. So you can have a whole lifetime of a clean state, or little patches here and there, cracks, and then make a mistake, and we're going to come, and the whole lifetime of stuff that you've done is eradicated. And I think I would like, as if we're human, for us to have some form, not to forget to have some form of empathy, compassion, forgiveness, not just not be so, that's it, write her off, how could she? No, because we're not applying the same rules to people who've done much more over a period of time and got to higher echelons and are still worth much more money in 5 minutes than Diane has been in 30 years. Just saying.
Thank you. No, thank you. Well said. I'm gonna, because we only have 8 minutes left for our seminar, I'm going to invite Johannes to come in, and then invite our panelists to respond to Sarah, E. Scott, and Johannes, their reflections and questions. Johannes.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you to all the panel and everyone who's spoken before me. And yeah, I suppose I wanted to thank the panel as well, because I think I just done that, sorry. But yeah, particularly Penny, for your comments around reparatory justice and things of that, because I think quite often that is left for us in the Black community to speak up and to speak about. And actually, I don't think, I guess over 30 years of being involved in this sort of thing, we haven't gotten very far just speaking on our own. So allyship is very important. So thank you for that. I think I agree with all the comments that have been made on the panel, especially sort of in regards to there being a hierarchy of racism. I don't think there is one, or discrimination. Every form of discrimination is wrong and needs to be confronted. I personally think, and I'm not sure, I can't speak for Diane Abbott, and I'm not going to try to, but I suppose what I take from it when I heard initially this term or phrase hierarchy of racism wasn't that one form of racism was more important than the other, but that the way that society tends to approach it or treat it, it does seem to be like that. And I wanted to ask the panel what their thoughts was around that in terms of, as Penny was saying, though, the Holocaust of African Caribbean people has never really been sort of mentioned. We're about to sort of crown a new monarch, a new king. There's all sorts of conversations about monarchs and their blessings of slave ships and all this sorts of stuff, and just the entire history that is sort of enshrined within that. And it's treated with almost sort of like, I mean, I've had several people throughout my life who would tell me, get over it, basically. But they would never dare to say that to a Jewish person or somebody from those sorts of backgrounds. And as some of the Jewish panelists have spoke, there's been that culture within the Jewish culture, which is sort of like, you know, they tried to kill us, but we're still here. Whereas if we say in the Black community, quite often it's seen as sort of victim culture, it's seen as negative, it's seen in a negative kind of way. And so when I hear this phrase of hierarchy of racism, I suppose I do see a truth to it, but not in terms of one is more important, but that in the society that we currently live in, we are being divided along those lines.
Brilliant. Thank you, Johannes. Panelists, I hand the last word to you, Penny, Anna, and Christine, in that order.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't quite catch what the question was from Johannes, but I'll try and relate to some of the things that were said. But in terms of Diane Abbott and what was she thinking, I can't speak for her, but I think that Labour saying that they've purged the party of anti-Semitism, I find that personally quite irritating, and potentially maybe there's something around the lack of voice around prioritizing racism in any, you know, anti-Black racism in any policy, or, you know, it's kind of done and now we're doing anti-Semitism. So maybe she was irritated by that. And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that, you know, any other person is allowed to be as clumsy, racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic as they like, and they apologize and move on, and that's job done. And, you know, Auntie Diane has been vilified from the minute that she lifted her head above the parapet and decided to get involved. So I'm with her on that. And the other thing I wanted to just add is that, you know, Black people and Jews in this country and elsewhere have acted in, you know, we've got a long history of solidarity. And I know it can sound ironic in reference to potentially, you know, the state of Israel, but, you know, we say we want to be on the side of the oppressed and not the side of the oppressor. So I hope that we can work together for everybody's benefit.
Thank you, Penny. Anna.
Maybe Diane Abbott was responding to the severity and the visceral experience of racism experienced by Black people. You know, it's as Christine Callender was saying earlier, the evidence is there in the numbers. You know, I used to work for a London borough and we had to collect data on permanent exclusion from school, and we had to use specific government mandated ethnicity criteria. So Black African was collapsed into one group, and what that data showed was that white working class boys were the ones who were struggling the most. But when we in the local authority decided to slice our data up more finely in relation to the populations that we did have, we found that actually it was Somali girls who needed that resource. They were the ones who were struggling the most. And that's a really good example of how institutional racism works and why we have to be alert to it. And it's just so insidious. It runs through everything. So perhaps that's one thing she was responding to. And the second one is that this government has launched or is launching a political attack on anti-racist practice, particularly around anti-Black racism. They've come out really clearly against talking about critical race theory in schools, for example. They've come out, look at that report on institutional racism in the police, where somebody You know, they were going on about institutional isn't a word we can use because it's political. I mean,
Right.
honestly, and that was, of course, cynically adopted by the leading party and in all of their media, which they own. And cynically, and I think they're being cynical, I don't think they care about this stuff or think very much detail about it. I think they're just trying to win votes on an anti-immigration standpoint. I think that's all it's about. But I think that, you know, Diane Abbott is a politician. She has to go into that building every day and sit in that environment. And that's what she was responding to. It's a fight for people's lives, really. And it's the viscerality that I think underpins what she was saying. Obviously, I can't speak for her, but that's kind of where I think she was coming from, maybe.
Thank you, Anna. Christine.
Yeah, I think I want to come back to a point that Escott was making about, you know, Diane's, you know, had this long political career. She's done much good work, but she makes, you know, she writes what she writes, and she ends up being vilified. And I think we do have to think about each other and also think about her. And, you know, I'm not a Christian, but I think about, you know, Ephesians 3:2, where 32, where it talks about being kind and compassionate to one another and forgiving each other. And I think in much the way that some people have been forgiven or it's been passed over, that the things that they've said have been said in error, we have to give Diane that space and that opportunity too. We all have flaws. She has hers. It's just that hers was on the public stage.
Thank you, colleagues, and so much for your really clear and incisive and insightful reflections, and thank you, attendees, delegates, for turning out this evening. I suppose just to summarize, you know, we hope that the seminar this afternoon has provided some greater clarity around what racism is, and also what anti-Semitism is, and also what is similar between them and also what is different. But we can't speak for Diane Abbott, and there is a strength of feeling in the room that she was not malicious. She was just clumsy, but there's another strength of feeling which says, given her experience, this was really, really problematic. But one thing is clear is that Diane Abbott's actions have helped us all to begin a conversation, and it's a conversation which we hope that this space has provided some nuance and some clarity around, and certainly one in which we hope that will not end here. So thank you very much, colleagues, and have a good evening and stay safe.